Winter came early that year in Pennsylvania. Fog lay thick over the road leading into Hollow Street, turning each old wooden house into a drifting shadow suspended in the cold air. Nora Whitman stopped her car in front of the home she had just bought, a two-story house painted a faded silver gray with dark shingles and a porch flaking its last coat of paint. The property had once belonged to a family that had vanished from the town more than half a century ago. She stepped out of the car, inhaling the heavy scent of damp wood and decaying leaves. Each step across the snow crunched softly, like distant whispers fading into the ground. For a moment, Nora thought of her late husband and felt perhaps she had chosen the right place to begin again. A quiet place, far from the city, far from memories rotting like old planks in the hollow of her chest. Inside, the house was perfectly still. When she opened the door, a breath of cold air rolled out from the hallway and coiled around her legs, as if the house had been holding its breath for years, waiting. Each room lay beneath a film of dust, so thick it blurred the floral patterns of the wallpaper. In the corner of the living room stood an artificial Christmas tree, drooping, tangled in cobwebs, as though the last Christmas here had never truly ended. As Nora walked down the corridor, she noticed a narrow staircase leading to the attic. She switched on her flashlight, the wooden steps groaning beneath her weight. The space above was cramped, barely tall enough to stand. Old boxes, ornaments, and Christmas lights were twisted together under a veil of dust. Amid the clutter, her flashlight caught something round, something faintly luminous. A glass ornament. Nora lifted it carefully. Inside, a small curl of what looked like hair floated, and around the rim, barely visible, were the etched words, Eleanor, 1959. The cold beam of the flashlight refracted through the glass, casting a thin red halo like dried blood. When her fingertip brushed the surface, she flinched. It was icy, as if she were holding metal buried in snow. She carried the ornament downstairs and set it on the mantel before continuing her cleaning. But as the day waned, the house grew steadily colder. Moisture gathered on the window panes, forming long streaks that looked like the smudged handprints of a child. The clock on the wall stopped at exactly 11:47. Nora adjusted it, but the second hand refused to move. Night fell. Wind slipped through the cracks beneath the door, rustling the curtains. As Nora arranged the living room, a faint metallic clink echoed behind her, a thin, crystalline sound. She turned. The artificial Christmas tree, which she had not touched, now had a single ornament hanging from one of its branches, a glass sphere gleaming softly in the dark. Its reflection shimmered across the wall, trembling like a dying flame, and for an instant, Nora thought she saw a small figure standing in the center of the room, curly hair, hollow eyes, staring out from within the glass. The clock's hands remained frozen at 11:47, and inside the new house, the cold thickened like a layer of ash slowly forming in the air. Morning in Hollow Creek began with fog and the hoarse cries of crows over snow-covered fields. Nora woke to a house frozen through, her breath a pale cloud hanging in the air like the smoke of a dying cigarette. The clock still stood at 11:47, its second hand coated in a thin film of gray dust. She went downstairs. The artificial Christmas tree remained where it was, bare, unlit, lifeless. The glass ornament still hung from one of its branches, and in the dim morning light, she saw faint smudges inside it, shadows that looked like trapped ashes. When Nora turned it gently in her hand, a fleeting image flickered across the glass, a room smoldering in flame, red light pulsing as if alive beneath the surface. That afternoon, Constance Hale, the real estate agent, stopped by with the final paperwork. Nora let her in. In the dim, heavy light of the house, Constance hesitated, her eyes wandering over the dust-caked furniture before resting on the Christmas tree. Her expression changed. She stared at the ornament, her face draining of color. When she finally spoke, her voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "I've heard about the fire in 1959. This house was part of it." Later, Nora searched the town library for records. Between the brittle pages of old newspapers, she found a headline: "Christmas Tragedy of 1959. Fire Consumes the Green Family." The black and white photograph showed a skeletal frame of burnt timber. Beneath it, a caption listed the victims, including one child, Eleanor Green, age 10, found dead in the living room while decorating the Christmas tree. The article noted that the blaze began from an unidentified glowing object on the tree. No trace of the child's remains was ever recovered, only a single glass ornament, perfectly intact amid the ashes. That night, Nora sat alone by the fireplace. Snow fell heavily outside, blanketing the windows. The flame cast a weak gold glow over the ornament on the mantel. When she leaned closer, a gust of cold air swept through and extinguished the fire. The room plunged into darkness. The smell of old smoke crept through the cracks, thick, acrid, and ancient, the scent of something that had burned long before she ever arrived. From the ceiling came soft, deliberate footsteps, small, measured, pacing across the attic floor. Nora froze, her pulse quickening. The boards above groaned once, then fell silent. A few grains of dust drifted down from the ceiling, catching the faint red shimmer from the ornament. The light inside it had changed, no longer white, but a slow, breathing amber, deepening toward the color of smoldering embers. Nora took the ornament out to the porch, intending to throw it away. But as she lifted it toward the dim light, she saw a small hand pressed against the inside of the glass, its fingers etched with blackened burns. She dropped it into the snow. There was no sound of shattering. It sank silently, as if swallowed by water. When she bent down to look for it, it was gone. Back inside, the ornament had returned, hanging once again from the tree, in the exact same spot. Only now, a single strand of black hair floated within, twisted and clinging to a trace of ash. Later that night, faint crackling echoed from the chimney. Nora struck a match and peered inside. A child's handprint, made of gray soot, marked one of the inner bricks, damp and recent. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside the house, the temperature dropped until her breath froze midair, lingering as though another breath was rising beside her in the dark. The third morning settled over Hollow Creek, thick and heavy as fog. Nora woke to the scent of cold smoke, the kind that seeps into wood grain, clings to clothing, to hair, to the breath itself. The fireplace had gone dead. The chimney seemed blocked. She called a local repairman, a man named George Tiller, who lived on the outskirts of town. George arrived around noon. The warmth from his large frame was drained the instant he stepped across the threshold. He remarked that the air inside felt heavy and wet, like a flooded basement, before kneeling to inspect the heating system. Nora stood a few feet away, watching. From the chimney, flakes of ash drifted down in clumps, black and gray, as though the fireplace had been burning for years, though Nora had only lit it twice. George followed the pipework down to the basement. The wooden door moaned as it opened, stirring a slow swirl of ash into the air. The basement was low and damp, its stone walls stained with moisture. In the beam of his flashlight, the old iron pipes bore scorch marks, warped slightly, as if they had once glowed red. In the far corner sat a rusted tin box. George crouched and pried it open. Inside were fragments of melted ornaments, warped and fused like candle wax. Amid the debris he found an old photograph, the paper scorched, its edges blackened as if kissed by flame. The picture showed a little girl with curly hair, about 10 years old, standing beside a Christmas tree, her smile frozen in place. Hanging from one of the branches beside her was a glass ornament engraved, Eleanor, 1959. George held the photograph up and murmured something under his breath. In the stillness, a faint sound rose, a soft, fleeting giggle, like a child laughing far away. Then it faded. He took a photo of the picture with his phone, slipped the tin box into his bag and climbed the stairs. Nora waited at the doorway. His face had turned a pale gray sweat, shining on his forehead, though the house was barely above 30 degrees Fahrenheit. By dusk, George had left. When his truck disappeared beyond the line of trees, the snowfall thickened, the flakes grayish, carrying specks of soot that drifted on the wind. That night, Nora couldn't sleep. From within the walls came a thin whistling sound, like someone whispering through the chimney. She lay still, listening. Then came another noise, the faint scrape of metal, something being dragged. Nora descended to the living room, flashlight trembling in her hand, and aimed it at the fireplace. The beam pierced the darkness of the flue. A thin ribbon of smoke curled out, laced with the acrid scent of burnt hair. Then she heard it, a small, distant sound, the echo of a child's laugh coming from deep within the chimney. On the mantel, the glass ornament glowed again. This time, the shapes within it had changed. Alongside the ash and smoke were two new figures, a tiny silver reindeer and a glass angel with one broken wing. They spun slowly in midair, as though suspended in another world. Nora recoiled, her fingers numb with cold. The clock on the wall had stopped once more, and at 11:47. The fire went out. The room dissolved into darkness. The next morning, sirens wailed outside. A police truck idled by the road. They had found George Tiller inside his work van, body stiff, face covered in a fine layer of ash. In his hand, he clutched a small glass ornament shaped like a reindeer, its black eyes staring, its open mouth frozen mid-scream. On his sleeve, faint and smeared, was the imprint of a child's hand, a streak of black smoke pressed deep into the fabric. 3 days after George's death, the house on Hollow Street began to change. The air grew thick with the smell of ash and burnt pine. Each time Nora crossed the hallway, the floorboards groaned beneath her feet, as if a breath was rising from the darkness below. The fireplace no longer worked, yet a faint heat still pulsed from the chimney, unnatural and steady, the opposite of the biting cold outside. The artificial Christmas tree in the living room was no longer the same. What had once held a single glass ornament was now covered in decorations, old-fashioned ones, all from the 1950s, silver bulbs, glass bells, tiny angel dolls. None of them belonged to Nora. Every morning when she woke, there were more. The temperature inside dropped to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Her breath froze mid-air as she moved through the house. On the fogged windows, small handprints kept appearing, each print etched with the faint outlines of scorched fingers, fading whenever she drew near. Nora stayed in the kitchen, trying to write down what was happening. But ash kept settling on the paper, as though someone were standing beside her, quietly dusting it over each page. From the hallway, the clock remained fixed at 11:47. The light glinting off its cracked glass shimmered against the wall, a nervous, trembling red, like a flame about to die. She went to the town archives. The records confirmed what she already feared. This was the site of the 1959 Christmas fire. According to the report, the blaze began in the living room tree, erupting from a luminous object hanging at its center. The only confirmed victim was Eleanor Green, 10 years old. Her mother's body had been burned beyond recognition. The child's remains were never found. Nora closed the file, her hands shaking. Through the fogged library window, she saw a small figure standing in the snow outside, a girl in a white dress, head tilted, eyes dark as coal. When Nora rushed out, the figure was gone. Only tiny footprints remained, pressed into the damp snow. That night, Nora decided to end it. She gathered every ornament, every piece of decoration, and threw them into the fireplace. The flames erupted instantly, fierce, unnaturally red, almost black, and yet no warmth came from them. As the ashes began to rise, she saw something that turned her blood cold. The glass ornament still hung from the tree, blazing, untouched by fire. The light in the room dimmed, then shifted to a pale blue glow. Inside the ornament, an image took form. A young girl standing amid the flames, curly hair singed, her lips curved into a faint smile. Her eyes were hollow but fixed directly on Nora. The tree began to tremble. Ornaments crashed to the floor, shattering like brittle bones. Wind howled through the cracks in the walls, rattling the house to its frame. Nora stumbled backward, her body pressed against the wall. The ornament's glow spread, flooding the room with a violent orange-red light. Fire ignited around her without fuel. The floorboards cracked open, smoke thickened until breathing became agony. Through the haze, she saw the child step out of the ornament, her body translucent, her dress in tatters, eyes burning softly from within. The child reached out a hand. Nora wanted to run, but her legs would not obey. The flames roared higher. The room drowned in a deep crimson hue. The Christmas tree burned, collapsing into cinders, yet the glass ornament still shone, clear, unbroken, untouched amid the fire. The last thing Nora saw was the girl's face pressed against the inner glass, lips moving soundlessly. Then everything turned to ash. Outside, the snow kept falling, and that Christmas night, Hollow Creek glowed once more. By morning, the sky above Hollow Creek was thick with gray fog. The snow had fallen so heavily that the horizon disappeared. There was no longer a line between the earth and the heavens. The air carried a faint, smoldering scent, dense and stubborn, as if it had lingered there long before anyone ever settled in this place. Police and fire crews arrived on Hollow Street at dawn. All that remained of Nora Whitman's house was a mound of blackened ash. The roof had collapsed, the beams were charred to dust, and a thin layer of ice lay over the ruin like a funeral veil. No body was found. No signs of struggle. No trace of what had started the fire. Only a single object resting at the center of the foundation. A perfect, unbroken glass ornament. It was collected with the debris and taken to the station as evidence. In the official report, the attending officer noted, the object remained cold to the touch, despite being recovered from the hottest point of the fire. When he placed it on his desk, light from the window refracted through the glass, casting a faint red halo that slid up the wall like the last flicker of a dying flame. The story spread quickly. The older residents of Hollow Creek whispered about Eleanor's ornament, a tale buried more than 60 years ago. They remembered, in 1959, when the first house burned, the very same ornament was found intact amid the ashes. 20 years later, during the second fire, it reappeared again. And now, once more, it had returned. At the station, the ornament was sealed inside a glass display case. Under the neon lights, it looked harmless, just another relic of the holiday. But after dark, the night watchman sometimes heard faint metallic tapping from within, as though something were shifting inside the sphere. One claimed he saw a small pulse of light emanating from its core, blinking in time with the station clock, 11:47. Days later, Constance Hale, the real estate agent, came to give her statement. She looked older, her face drawn tight like someone forced to remember something she'd long tried to forget. When her eyes fell upon the ornament in the glass case, the color drained from her skin. She whispered, "The third time," and said nothing more. Outside, the snow fell harder, burying the road to Hollow Street. No one dared to walk near the burned lot. Yet each night, a few swore they saw a flicker of orange light glowing faintly from the ashes. A light that never went out, no matter how strong the wind blew. A week later, during an evidence inventory, a young officer accidentally opened a sealed box. As he leaned over it, his breath crystallized against the surface. Inside, he saw the faint silhouette of a little girl. Curly hair, hollow eyes, small hands pressed against the inner glass. He stumbled back, dropping his pen. When he looked again, the ornament was empty. The case file was sealed soon after. The land fenced off, marked, "Danger, do not enter." But every Christmas season, someone still leaves flowers and decorations at the edge of the property. They say each year the ornament in the glass case glows a little brighter. In the cold storage room of the police station, the lights eventually fade. Darkness swallows everything. Only a dim red shimmer seeps through the cracks of the box, projecting the silhouette of a little girl waving, her smile fading slowly into the dark. Beneath it, the label on the glass has begun to peel, leaving behind just a few lonely letters. Eleanor, 1959. And when the clock on the wall stops at 11:47, the air turns frigid once more, followed by the faint, rhythmic tapping of glass, like a knock at the door, heralding the arrival of yet another Christmas.